Let me tell you what happens when you get divorced and you don't plan. Your average divorce probably costs between 20 and 40,000.
Family lawyer Ursula Danagher has over 30 years' experience helping clients protect their wealth and their future.
What's going to happen if, sadly, the relationship goes wrong? How are you going to approach it? That key, important issue of pensions. And I think prenups are essential, and they're essential for people who have normal lives.
Did you hear that, Will? William at the back, my business partner, he's married. You got a post-nup, mate? As a divorce, would you call yourself a divorce solicitor or a divorce attorney? Or
Divorce lawyer.
Divorce lawyer. You probably really only deal with the bad end of the relationship. Not many people are going to come in and go, our relationship's great, just to let you know.
No, which is why one of my kind of go-to topics is prenups and post-nups, because it's a kind of constructive approach to relationships and organisation and personal finance, which I think is really important. Unfortunately, divorce tends to happen when people's emotions are raw. They're reacting to what's happening right now. They haven't really always got time to plan. Generally, both people don't agree to get divorced at the same time. It does happen, but often one person is completely surprised. And that leads to a lot of additional stress and emotion that can be avoided if you're not planning for a divorce, you're planning for the potential of a relationship breakup, which can happen for so many reasons.
How do you find that people navigate that conversation? Does it go down well,
No, it doesn't go down well with a lot of people, because it's a bit like people raising the issue of having a will prepared. If you're young and buoyant and, hungry for life, the last thing you want to talk about is potentially dying early or death or planning, when you're not going to be here. And people are nervous around these topics. Prenups and postnups have been fairly central to the super wealthy for a very long time, because marriage in those arenas is pretty much about a financial transaction. I'm not saying there isn't love, there isn't passion, there isn't all the usual things, but if you're worth a great deal of money, you're going to be more prompted to think. A lot of people, when they marry, are going to be at the beginning of their lives, even if it's, say, around the 30 years of age. That's not a time when you think you need to plan for the future. I was talking to a young person last night because I said I was coming to do this. And she said, I'm determined to plan my finances early. And she's about 28. I said, good for you. But that isn't the usual approach. No. People want to live for today, don't they?
For me, I always thought that prenup was more of an American thing, and I didn't think that we actually had it in the UK. But I was listening to one of your podcasts, The She-Wolf, on The She-Wolf, and you said 42% of British marriages end in divorce. I think America's around 50% or a bit higher. So I thought that was an American problem, but it's also here. Do you find like nowadays, a lot of your clients, because people are younger and I guess demographics are changing, do you find like a lot of couples are coming to you younger and like a bit earlier rather than like to do the prenups rather than before?
No.
No? People are still
not
scared?
Not really. I'll give you an example of a client who was ahead of the game, was somebody who'd been super successful at an early age. And he was actually adopted and had a very successful life in Europe with his adopted family. And he came to me at age 30, and he wanted to protect the first slice of his money for his family who'd brought him up, to make sure they were taken care of. And he then planned to share his wealth going forward. And his fiancée was absolutely happy with that arrangement. Of course, it's easier when there's lots of money to go around. It gets a bit trickier when there isn't enough money. And that's why for the average person, although it seems like a bit over the top to have a prenup or postnup, in actuality, it's a very good idea and it's sound planning.
Do you get pressure from the parents? Because I imagine the bank of mum and dad is a big difference.
It's a growing issue, isn't it?
Because they'll be like, we weren't going to give you 100 grand.
Well, let me tell you what happens when you get divorced and you don't plan. So a lot of people will find these days they can't get on the property ladder without mum or dad putting in a contribution. It's not that uncommon with sort of a slice of middle England where both parents on either side might come up with, say, 100 grand each. They say, darling, there's my 100 grand for you, and the other. So they start off with a 200 pot, thinking that, that's fine. But actually, it isn't fine if you get divorced and you then expect to ring fence that 100. Now, it's not so bad if you both put in 100, but if one party's put in 150 and one's put in 25, and the first principle of any divorce is the sharing principle of 50-50, and you depart from that depending on the supporting factors, then it can seem quite unfair if something happens and you end up in a relatively short marriage. People don't plan to meet other people when they're married, but it does happen. And if it happens and you find you're then financially disadvantaged because you didn't plan, that's a double blow. And it also leads to a lot of resentment from the parents who've worked so hard to accumulate those funds to gift to their children.
You said then that you start from this first principle of 50-50 and then you depart from that.
Yeah.
Can we talk through that process? What do you mean from depart from it?
Okay. It will depend on factors like length of the marriage, can depend on contributions. That will only apply if it's a larger contribution from one party that will depart from equality if there's enough money in the pot to meet what we call need, because need is the key factor in any divorce. So any court hearing a case will want to ensure that both parties are treated fairly and that both parties' immediate needs are taken care of. If they have children, those children's needs are paramount and take priority. There's also the equation of one of you might be a bigger earner, therefore you can recover quicker. So it's not unusual to end up in a situation where you might split to 70-30. So the person who's earning less needs a bit more capital because they can't remortgage in the same way that the higher earner could. That key important issue of pensions. One of the reasons I'm quite impassioned, if you like, about prenups and post-nups is issues like pensions, because a lot of people don't realise, and men in particular who tend to have the larger pension, they seem to think that that's their asset. They've worked really hard. They've accumulated this money with contributions from their employer often over many years. And they expect to rely on that later. But in reality, it's important that a couple sit down together and work out if one of them is going to have the big pension and one may have none, they're going to have to share that later if they're not together. Because if they were together, they would be sharing the funds, wouldn't they? So there's 3 ways you can deal with a pension. You can have a pension sharing order, which has the advantage of allowing the couple to basically work out the value and divide it according to the share that's decided to be fair, starting usually at 50-50, but sometimes the lesser party might have a small pension, so you'd take that off and then you'd balance it. And that has the advantage of achieving what we call a clean break. So they go off into their future lives with financial independence. There's something else called offsetting, where one retains the pension, but they get more of, say, the house. Sounds attractive, but you can't end up these days with no provision for your elderly life. And I mean, I'm obviously considerably older than both of you two, but who knows? Who knows what's going to happen to pensions? They're getting pushed in further and further into our old age. And so it's going to be really important that I think most of us have a transitional period where we might work more flexibly with a top-up of pension, but most people are not going to be able to not have any pension provision because the state they're not going to be able to afford it.
You can kind of see why people wouldn't want to share their pensions.
Yeah, but you can also see why, like in the modern world, you need 2 incomes to raise a child.
Yeah.
And in the past, we valued the homeowner, the homekeeper more, didn't we? We basically said, we're talking traditional circumstances, we're not trying to be sexist, but we basically say the man goes and works and the woman stays at home, and both of those roles in a household are equal. They are of equal importance. You need one and the other. And now we're basically saying, oh no, you decided to stay at home and it's your fault you didn't save anything.
Well, yeah. I mean, the court's view is it is equality. Yeah. If one of you stayed at home, there is equality. But, more current to our situation is a situation where you carry on both going to work, but it inevitably happens that one of you steps down from their career a bit. I recently did a divorce involving a banker and a lawyer. The lawyer had stepped down from her career a bit because she was the homemaker and the lawyer, and she thought, well, I can pick this up later. That's fine, you can, but it still means you've missed those critical career jumps. When, if you've been a careerist, X years you do this, you get to associate, then you're a senior associate, then you're a partner if you're a lawyer, then you're an equity partner. If you come back to the table having had 10 years of just pottering in and out of the office, well, everybody used to dismiss you as the mum and the part-timer, you're then going to have the challenge of re-establishing your career later in life. You're then competing with all the youngsters who haven't had the career break. And it's a real struggle to get anywhere near equality. So there does need to be an adjustment. But I think a lot of people who are young, and I've got quite a few young nieces and nephews who are young married people with young children, they're open-minded to this now. They are more committed to sharing the burden, taking the paternity leave, and making sure there isn't that huge inequality.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they shouldn't be planning, because, we're still at a stage in life, in the world we live, where a lot of businesses are still not committed to things like pensions. Some of them, they're now being forced to contribute. Employees are being forced to contribute. But there are lots of professions where people don't have any pensions, or they have pensions that they treat as a little bit of a savings pot, but they don't keep up with it. And when financial pressure hits them, they drop away from that. Mm-hmm. So it's important that you keep, readdressing your situation throughout the relationship together in an open and transparent way.
Yeah, and I think I look at Jeff Bezos and Mackenzie. Is it Mackenzie Bezos? And like the flack that she got because she got billions, right? Yeah. But then at the same time, I don't think people realise that she was a genius. They met at a hedge fund together. Yeah. She was working at this quant hedge fund with him. Yeah. And she basically said, like, this man might change the world, which he did. So I'm going to support him from the background. And there's like a sacrifice there. And so with me and my partner, what I do is, I'm not inventing Amazon, right? But I'm making YouTube videos, and it's all consuming. And every day, she's like my therapist and like my person that deals with me. We contribute to the house together, but she's like a business partner from a psychological perspective. Yeah. And I think Mackenzie to Jeff was probably that as well. Yeah. And I don't think people value that. No. If you might have someone who's a high flyer who comes home really stressed at night, who's the person they offload on? It's the partner.
Well, I've done divorces where, it tends to be the woman is highly intelligent, creative, has been a homemaker. I've had clients who've basically renovated huge properties. One divorce I did, I had to come to court with a whole photo album of her renovating this beautiful property, which they then sold for a lot of money. And on the other side, the pleading suggested that all she'd done is pick a few bits of tiling and chose the colours. I had pictures of her lifting out, window frames, putting in doors, researching the history of the building. And that's a kind of direct connection to that sort of contribution. But sometimes the more successful the man in particular is, the more support they need, the more flexibility the wife has to show and the children have to show. And
an understanding of like, I can't work.
International travel. How can you have a job that people take you seriously in if you're going to be saying, well, I might have to move in a year because I might be on the other side of the world because he's landed this great job. And somebody's got to be there to catch all of the, the issues that are going on in the background. And that's why the courts treat that level of contribution as very significant.
One of the goals of personal finance is to take the money that we earn and to put it to work, so that one day we can hopefully stop working. But I often speak to company owners who have got plenty of money, quite large sums of cash, just sat in their business bank account doing absolutely nothing. So why not at least put that money to work? This is why I'm happy that we're working with Tide. They offer an instant access saver which I use as an account to generate interest on excess money for things like tax savings. New members can earn up to 4.22% AER variable for up to 6 months. I say up to because it depends on how much you deposit in your account, and the more you save, the higher the rate. You can get this deal, plus you can get £100 cash back if you fund your Tide Instant Saver account with £5,000 in the first 30 days, if you use code MAKINGMONEY. T's and C's apply. The code is Making Money, all one word, or you can use the link in the description where you'll also find all of the offer and the full terms. The variable rate is correct as of the 8th of May 2025.
So all the divorce drama can be avoided with a prenup, but now...
Okay, I'm only hesitating because a prenup is a starting point, okay? But you've got to keep that document up to date.
Yeah.
Okay, it's got to be reviewed.
So if you have like another kid or you...
So what you would do is you'd have a prenup, and then at the appropriate stage where there's something changing in your lives, you'd follow that up with a post-nup, where you would kind of agree. You might agree at the point of having children that you want to reorganise the finances. You want to plan things like schooling, what's going to happen if, sadly the relationship goes wrong, how are you going to approach it? So it's very important that you carry this thought prompting process throughout the relationship. I mean, when I first started doing this job, classically, and I acted against all the moneyed husbands in the beginning. I was in a firm that acted for all the city wives, and I don't mean the city wives who were in the city, they were married to the city guys. They knew nothing about the finances. And in the good old days, we used to say, well, bring in any piece of the paper you can. You're not even allowed to do that anymore because we have to be completely transparent of what we know. And you can't, invade the privacy of the other party. So you're relying on them being honest. There's a lot of people, and most people are honest, but there'll be that small slice who've never been honest and have always been covert and have always hidden a large slice of wealth. And that then escalates the cost of the divorce because someone like me can't advise appropriately and reasonably if I'm in the dark. So the first thing I say to a client is, even if they come in, they sit down in front of me and they say, Ursula, what I really want is an amicable divorce. I've heard that the best thing is not to go to court. And I say, fine, yes, alternative dispute options are very important, mediation, arbitration, but you can't do any of that if you don't know what's in the pot. So let's start off with disclosure. And if we had in place some advanced disclosure and an understanding, that speeds up that process.
But to play devil's advocate, I feel as a man, not being sexist, but have you heard the song by Kanye West, Gold Digger? She take my money when I'm... Yeah, so I think a lot of guys, especially more in America than here, but like a lot of like famous athletes or people get trapped often. So like a celebrity, like a model might purposely get pregnant so they can take some of their money. So in times like that, or in times like, say they're married for a year and then she runs off, she just wanted his money, or there's infidelity, it's kind of understandable that the man or the woman, if it's the other way around, might not want to disclose, whoever the breadwinner is, might not want to disclose all their assets. They're like, this person broke my heart, they tricked me, I thought we'd be together forever.
That would be a major mistake on their behalf.
Just not disclosing all their assets.
If you don't disclose, and then the disclosure that was hidden becomes transparent, and it often does by reason of various reasons, you can re-challenge the settlement because it wasn't done in a transparent way. So one of the, and obviously as my career developed, I ended up dealing with the asset holders, and some people in my family career have been extremely wealthy, sports people, extremely wealthy entrepreneurs, assets all over the world. The first thing I say to them, we're going to protect these assets to best advantage. I need to know everything.
Well, how do you find out if there isn't? Like, so do you get a hunch like this woman or man is lying, they're hiding something?
Well,
like,
we carry out a forensic review of everything. So generally, unless you've planned for years to get divorced, which most people don't, to be fair, there'll be an audit trail of your money. So you might have accounts you had that you shut down. You might have accounts that you're making payments to that, these days, your bank account is like a storybook, isn't it? an account like an American Express account, it so over describes what you do. People don't seem to realise how there's going to be a trail.
You know where people eat, you know
Yes,
where,
yes.
okay.
You know, I hate to state the obvious, but you'd be amazed what turns up in people's credit card statements. And they don't.
Just OnlyFans.
And they don't. You know, trips abroad.
Yeah.
I didn't know you were abroad then.
Yeah.
Why are you buying flowers over there?
To people,
Yeah.
That sort of thing. So if you're having a kind of semi-double life, and the temptation is there for people who have everything, they've got, you know, enormous resource. There's the temptation they get a bit bored. People grow apart in relationships. People kind of sometimes come to a bit of an agreement between them that they'll have a kind of
open relationship.
Yeah, open relationship. But when people have an open relationship, they don't always realise that could lead to, you know, a division of assets at some point, and that's something I haven't prepared for. But they're prepared to have an open relationship. So.
Justin Timberlake and Jessica Biel have a prenup, and if he cheats...
I thought you were going to say open relationship. I was like, that guy, right?
What relationship? No,
you got Jessica Biel
and he's got an open relationship. Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, by his course.
By his course.
If he cheats on her, she gets $500,000.
That doesn't seem like a lot. She's
isn't very much.
She's surely got a lot of money herself.
Yeah,
right?
and Beyonce and Jay-Z have a similar one, but I think she gets like
500 million.
She gets 5 million $5 million for each child, and like 1 million every time he cheats or something.
So every time he has
1 million for every year of marriage if they have a divorce.
But again, she's worth hundreds of millions.
I know, but
well, I hate to be the party pooper here, but in England and Wales, we don't allow clauses like that.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be...
For every illegitimate child, you get £1 million quid.
Not even if you cheat in a marriage.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
No. The documents in this country are designed to allow people to plan their finances, allow what happens if they have children, allows what happens when they sell properties. It doesn't allow us to manage their relationship. I wouldn't say that there aren't post-nups that are drawn up on the back of infidelity. I've had some really quite interesting ones. I had one that was many billions of pounds that had to go into a separate account involving, and this I hasten to add, this was many years ago, involving Russians, where he cheated in a long marriage, and she said, okay, I now feel insecure, I want you to park some money for me, and he said, fine, I don't want to get divorced. He was, you know, as far as he was concerned, she was his rock, but, you know, if he'd played away, he was happy to park some money in her name, and that's what they did. So post-nups can address infidelity, because the thing is, they create distrust.
Should people just not get married?
No, I think marriage is a very important part of our society. It gives the security a lot of children in particular benefit from. Sadly, I have to deal with cases where there isn't a marriage, and my only way of providing for children in that scenario at the moment is under what's called Schedule 1 of the Children Act, and that essentially allows mother as the carer, usually the primary care of the children, to make an application under a piece of legislation that was not designed to facilitate this scenario. And it only allows you to seek provision of housing whilst the child's minor, so it's not permanent. You might get lump sum orders to deal with debt or the child's needs. You might get child maintenance if you're wealthy enough to earn at least $156,000 a year. If you're below that, you still have to rely on the child support agency. You can't get top-up maintenance. And there are other reasons why you might get money through that medium, but it's very unreliable. And generally specialists like myself tend to deal with these cases on a regular basis, but some family lawyers would hardly come across a Schedule 1 case because people don't know what rights they have and they don't explore it.
And what's shocking to me as a father is that you're basically implying that there's parents out there that wouldn't look after their children as a matter of moral duty.
The thing is that I have learnt over the years that people have a way of deciding what they think is fair. So my classic interview with particularly wealthy men used to be, they'd sit in the room with me, they'd talk to me about how they wanted to share, etc., etc. And then we'd, after about 3/4 of an hour, get down to nitty-gritty of what they actually considered to be in the pot. So they would then exclude lots of things like they considered their business interests to be outside the pot. They considered their pension might be outside the pot. They might suggest their significant investments are outside the pot. What they thought was in the pot,
I got 50
was
quid in
the
my
house,
wallet.
some joint account savings. Yeah. They might even have thought about, in the right circumstances, setting up some trust money for their children. So I'm not saying that everybody's immoral, that they're not loving of their children, but not everybody has the same approach to sharing as other people. And that's why when you marry, it is a significant step, because you're at some point going to be facing a third party analysing what should go into that pot. I mean, I once dealt with, interestingly enough, a young man who he was a teacher, primary school teacher, and he married his childhood sweetheart, who happened to inherit a great deal of money through her father. And the reason that they got divorced was she didn't want to have children, and he desperately did want to have children. They're 5 years into their marriage, and he was kind of forced out of what he would have considered his lifetime relationship without much to show for it. And he was too embarrassed at that stage, because men tended not to make financial applications. They just used to disappear into the ether and think, well, I'm a man, I can't possibly make a claim. And I had to negotiate what I thought was a fair settlement so that he could start again. And I insisted that we looked into how much it would cost him to rehouse where they were living in something sensible. And at the time, the right figure was 500,000. And it meant little or nothing to her family to give it to him. But initially, there was a lot of resistance.
Are there any differences between the pre and post-nup and what's in them?
Fundamentally, what you're trying to do is organise your financial arrangement. So they're pretty similar. They're just happening at a different time point. Most people split their assets into what we call separate property, shared property, and joint property. And sometimes you can specifically schedule separate property so it's all pre-acquired. You might even factor in property that you're going to go on to acquire through inheritance or through a business and actually want to ring fence it. You've got that luxury if you're still going to tick what we call the needs box. So if there's enough resource available to make more stuff separate and it's what you both want to do, that's an option. If you want to come to the equation or at the table having separate property, but you want to go on to share property, you can have a formula that allows you to, from a certain point, start sharing, for example, the uplift in a property. So you might protect the initial investment, but you might agree to share, and it might be in equal proportions or it might not be, the uplift. And I recently advised on an agreement where, on a time basis, for the initial 3 years, they wanted to be not so generous. After 5 years, it got more generous, and 7 years, it started to fall away and making any disparity, that they wanted to have equality. Because by the time you got to that length of relationship, that's pretty significant in most people's lives.
It's a long time to hold out in a bad relationship.
Yeah.
So a little quiz for you. Do you know what any of these things mean? ISO 27001, SOC 2, the EU AI Act, or DORA? If not, no worries, but if you do, it probably means you work for a company that cares about security and compliance. If you're a growing business today, you have to prove that you comply with security and privacy frameworks like these, and GDPR, so that you can land big deals and grow your business. But the problem is, achieving and then maintaining compliance with these frameworks is time-consuming and complicated. This is where our partner Vanta can help your business. Vanta automates up to 90% of the work and 85% of the associated costs for in-demand frameworks. So if you want to prove that you're secure and compliant, check out Vanta. You can also get $1,000 off Vanta if you go to vanta.com/makingmoney. So that's vanta.com/makingmoney for $1,000 off, and there's a link in the description for you.
So how expensive is it to have a divorce?
I mean, if you think about the range of people who get divorced, and it depends on your client base. But I have spent a lot of my career dealing with kind of the super wealthy. Then there is almost no limit to the costs that can get, lost in a combative divorce. However, being a bit more grounded, I'd say your average divorce probably costs between 20 and 40,000.
It's like the price of a wedding.
Yes.
Well, I don't know. I think the average. No, I think the average wedding is maybe like 14K or something. I don't know.
It's about 25.
Okay, is it? I mean, I don't know.
Is it true that the more you spend on the wedding, the more likely you are to get divorced? Or is that just one thing I saw on Instagram and people are just feeding me fakes?
You're trying to spend £1, aren't you? This is.
I think that's
$9.99 together forever. We're going to McDonald's. It'll be fun.
Yeah, I think that's something you've seen on the Instagram.
Yeah, so not true.
And do the prenups? So 2 questions. How much does a prenup or a post-nup cost, and do they reduce the cost of getting divorced?
Okay, I did a bit of research this morning because I was just interested in what's going on in the marketplace, because fees have always been a bit of a covert area with lawyers. I'm a great believer in transparency. I saw an advert this morning for £690 plus VAT for a prenup, and I thought, well, is that going to be a good investment, or is it a bit like an underfunded will, i.e. a will that isn't bespoke enough, isn't detailed enough, hasn't asked all the right questions and made the necessary tax efficiencies? So I think the cost comes down to how organised you are. If you're a couple who've already shared transparency and you both need to go and see independent lawyers, if you're going to arrive to see the lawyer in an organised way, they're going to drop their fees because time is money. So we charge according to the hour. That's still a bit old-fashioned. People do give fixed fees. I would give an estimate. So I would say, in a very organised couple, young couple, you might get one done for £1,500 plus VAT. It might be nearer to 3,000 if it's a bit more complicated. But I would expect most lawyers to be happy to operate at that level. There's certain, steps we have to take in life as we go through the lifestyle and life cycle that mean we need to plan ahead. And I think prenups are essential, and they're essential for people who have normal lives, who want to be organised.
So you have normal clients?
Do you only deal with rich people?
I have to say, as you elevate as a family lawyer and you tend to build a reputation, you start to attract wealthier clients. Personally, I had a change of heart not so long ago, and I'm now self-employed working for a platform law firm, and I'm really enjoying dealing with normal people again.
When you say normal, is that?
Well, my idea of normal depends on your age. So let's say you've been married for 10 years, you might have your family home, you might have a second home, you might have pensions on both sides or on one side at least, and you'll have some savings. That's a classic kind of normal couple. People who get divorced often don't realise that the divorce itself is the simple bit. You can now go onto a portal, and a lot of people are doing it themselves, but then realising that they haven't actually dealt with the finances. It's critically important that you end your marriage with a financial settlement in place that, in my opinion, should be court approved and that you can rely on, and that takes account of things like pensions. Because if you get divorced and you don't deal with your pension, your ex-spouse can come back and attack it at a later stage. And a lot of people don't know that. Now you've asked me, does a prenup or post-nup indeed save you money in divorce? The answer's got to be yes, if it's properly drawn up and it ticked all the criteria I mentioned earlier. If it's a document the court are going to recognise, it's going to cut out a large slug of what would be the need to determine what was fair and reasonable, because you'd already agreed it. And if you agreed it on a fair basis, the court are going to be persuaded by that. Divorce costs tend to build up in significance if you've got more complexity. So if you can make it more straightforward, if you can say that we already had this discussion, we already decided what we thought was fair and reasonable, the courts will want to respect that. They're not going to want to reinvent the wheel. They're going to respect that investment you've made.
How long after a divorce can people make a claim?
Well, it depends if one party's remarried. So remarriage is a bar, but if the other party hasn't remarried, it remains open. So it's absolutely critical that both parties enter into a financial settlement to end claims, both in life and death, because people, again, don't realise that someone can come back, an ex-spouse can come back and make a claim against your estate if they haven't achieved a settlement. So as far as I'm concerned, I always want my clients to enter into a consent order that's both parties have been independently advised, there's been financial transparency, and that the courts have actually approved the document. And even if you've agreed all the terms, you haven't gone through a more combative approach. You now have to file a document that's about 20 pages long, giving a breakdown of your financial position on both sides. Because ultimately the court want to know that your needs have been addressed and those of the children, and that it's ultimately fair. And it can be fair within the context of the length of the relationship, how independent and wealthy each party are. Obviously, if you can take care of yourself and you decide to split something in a very straightforward way, then the courts won't be concerned.
This financial settlement thing, they can come after you. So if you get remarried, it's like, okay, that's done. But if not, what in practice?
No, if you get remarried, you can't then make a claim later. Okay. But the other party still
can. So they
can.
So what does that mean in practice? Like, could you give us an example of if someone doesn't have that, what that could look like?
Well, you could be remarried and face a financial claim from your first family because you haven't resolved it.
For stuff that you've built after you've been married?
Well,
after you got divorced?
That might be disputed because that will come down to the individual facts of the case. But the potential to make that claim exists. And that can be a big blow to somebody. It might be a big pension pot. I've had examples of people going on to set up successful businesses that changed them from an average earner in a nice house, living with their family, to someone who suddenly becomes in the fortunate area of having £3-5 million, a different lifestyle, new freedoms, only to find that then has to be potentially shared at a later stage, long after the relationship of separation has taken place and long after the support of the first spouse made any real impact on the money they went on to make. So it seems, triply unfair.
You mentioned off camera that you had a client, or you knew someone who had a divorce for 3 years. How long does it normally take to settle a divorce? Because obviously if you're living with someone for 3 years that you don't like or you don't love anymore, it's like a horrible environment to be in.
I think one of the pressures we're facing at the moment is the court system is completely underfunded, is very slow, very cumbersome. And the court's approach now generally is you should definitely go down the alternative dispute resolution path first. And in fact, there's an automatic bar to you. Before you can issue an application now, you have to have had a mediation appointment. It can be remote, it can be by phone, where you actually discuss the pros and cons of not issuing a court application. But I sometimes, and I gave you the example of a case that had been going on for 3 years and it had gone down the mediation path. But unfortunately, only one of the parties really wanted to resolve things and they had the wrong impression about what their entitlement was. The courts these days have an obligation to focus on what we call a clean break, even where there are children these days. It's possible to give more capital, for example, to adjust the equation so that it's fair that you both go separate ways. And you might carry on paying agreed levels of child maintenance, but we don't always have spousal maintenance anymore. So one party paying the other. A lot of people are very, very fearful about spousal maintenance, quite rightly, because sometimes they used to roll on for the whole of their lives till they got to pension level. They're becoming less popular. Orders for life are less popular. The courts are less willing to apply them. So I think it's important that people are realistic about the parameters of settlement, and not everyone has a great lawyer. So if you go to a weak lawyer who doesn't tell you what the writing on the wall effectively is, there's inequality in the settlement principle. So let's say you're the better lawyer and you understand the need to be very transparent with your client, but the weaker party on the other side with the weaker lawyer doesn't understand. It's important you get them to the table as quickly as possible to make them understand what's going to be possible. And recently I issued an application. We got the case listed within 2 months. So we dealt with the financial transparency, and we got the matter pushed before the court. The other side didn't want to consider settlement, too early. But actually, we had enough information, and on the day we settled the case. And everyone was happy. You know, it's really important that people get a chance to get on with their lives. And having a lawyer, and I would say this, I'm a lawyer, we don't mind being paid reasonable fees, but I really don't like being paid money that I shouldn't have got for years because nobody addressed, you know, the ultimate objective, which is to achieve a fair and reasonable settlement.
Do you find that people are relieved typically and happy? Like, do both parties
Nobody's
walk away?
happy to pay a divorce lawyer money, but I think if you've given good value, good service, and you've provided certainty, not just to the couple, but to the children. The children want their parents. I mean, it's a huge sadness for most children to find they've got parents who are, you know, unfortunately caught up in the relationship breakdown scenario. But if you manage to cherish the children at the same time, you make them reassured that they know there's going to be an end point and that they're going to then share their lives with both parents going forward, which is something I, you know, passionately believe in. Earlier on in my career, there was a period when a lot of fathers did get shortchanged. That's because they'd been the breadwinners. And children lost their connection to their fathers. That happens much less now because we don't talk about custody anymore. We talk about sharing time. And there's an absolute right for a child to share time with both parents unless there are safeguarding issues. And there often aren't.
I remember the whole Fathers for Justice kind of movement, and my stepdad, who basically raised me, he had his own children, and it felt very unfair at that period that he went through in terms of the requirements for handing over the whole house, large maintenance, not seeing the kids. Any court order could just be like disregarded by the mother's side, and then he'd have to drag them through court again to get it enforced with all the cost. And it just felt like there was no justice for the fathers, essentially. Has that changed?
I think it has changed significantly. Partly it's changed because fathers have demanded more involvement in their children's lives, and mothers want them to be involved because you get that work-life balance, you get more equality in the relationship. So it's naturally happened. The courts are also very, very opinionated these days about people who fire off Children Act applications prematurely. You should be working out, and mediation really comes into its own when we're talking about children issues. You should be working out what works best for your children.
What about blended families and prenups?
Well, one of the biggest shocks about marriage is that when a couple marry, all of the children become children of the family. And whilst, you know, blended families might have historic financial settlements in place or voluntary arrangements where, say, the father is paying for his own child now in a blended family, that's fine. But if there isn't that sort of support going on and the relationship breaks down in the blended family, the asset holding, if it is the father, then will have to pay for all of the children, not just the child from their relationship.
Right.
And a lot of people don't know that.
Wow.
But
and they don't plan for it.
Even if the other father's like he's working, like the child's biological father is working.
They will be the first port of call. But sometimes, you know, there's inequality in financial positions between family one or father one and father two.
So you have to pay the difference.
That's my circumstance.
Yeah, father two, you have to pay the difference.
Yeah.
Well, this.
What if father one earns more? Can I be like, can he give me some money?
Well, he might end up contributing more for the child.
Yeah.
But I dealt with it many years ago. I never forget it. I dealt with a case where my client's mother had 5 children before she met wealthy father. And when the relationship broke down, her only resource was wealthy father. And he ended up paying for all 5 children quite significantly. And he had approached it with kind of mixed feelings of, I'll give you so much. But we had to, work out the full costs, and it was very significant. So be careful what you take on. So be transparent, but also I think these days there's little excuse to blissfully enter into such a complicated situation without doing a bit of personal research.
True, but I mean, I don't think I would expect if my partner had 5 children that I would be paying for all 5 children if we had a divorce.
You would be though if you were living together, right? And like I look at my circumstance, and what's clear to me is if I left my partner, her son's quality of life would drop significantly because he's in a position in life that he's become accustomed to because it's not his fault.
Yeah.
I pay for it all. And I do that because I earn more in the household. But if I leave, they end up going from the house that we live in to what? And what does his life do? And is that fair? I don't really know that is.
One of the factors we consider in a divorce is lifestyle. So if your, blended family has got used to a certain level of lifestyle and the relationship ends, you can't then expect them to then drop down a couple of levels of lifestyle. So we always factor in what's gone on in the family. So if you become the family that's used to having 3 lovely holidays a year, you can't then expect to settle on the basis that the child now only holidays in England, at a kind of more basic level. That would be unfair if you can afford it.
And I guess it comes down to the time and age of kids as well, right? Because if they're like 15, 16 and they the mom married a billionaire for a year and they got a few good holidays,
that gets factored in.
Yeah, okay.
It does get factored in.
Whereas my partner's son, I met him when he was 3. He's now 10. He's only known me. He doesn't even remember me not being there.
Yeah. But you see, all of these factors are what us family lawyers have to factor in with the assistance of whether it's alternative dispute routes or the court judgment. We are used to factoring in all these things, but the problem is the layperson in the street's not used to factoring them in. And therefore, if they don't get the right advice from the right expert early, they can waste a lot of time feeling aggrieved wrongly that they shouldn't have to pay this money. If you're going to pay the money, I'd rather pay the money now and not pay a load of money to a lawyer to find out later that I was wrong. I'd like to at least find out quickly with good advice and sensible transparency, this is the ballpark situation. And then you can, every divorce lawyer knows there's a top level and a bottom level of most settlements, and somewhere in the middle is probably where you're going to pitch for. But, getting to that point, knowing that point, takes time and experience. So, in my opinion, invest in a good lawyer.
And do you think then that every marriage should have a prenup?
Your colleague asked me that, and I probably would have said no many years ago. And we used to have the classic examples of, is this a case where there's going to be an inheritance? Is this a case where there's a later marriage, where there's a lot of separate property? Is there a great disparity in wealth? Is there a business that you need to protect? Because your business partners are not going to be too happy if you end up in a divorce. You've made no preparation, and they end up, not only are you distracted with a divorce, but you're distracted with giving financial information that's sensitive to the business.
Did you hear that, Will? William at the back, my business partner, he's married. You got a post-nup, mate? She's the one with all the money, to be fair. He married well.
Funnily enough, we used to say, if the other party's really wealthy, don't have a prenup. Why would you? Yeah. But in reality, I would say that it's a way of departing from potential future conflict, which is always a good thing.
If everyone had one and it was normalised, it wouldn't be as big an issue. But it feels almost like, don't you love me? Don't you think that do you think I'm going to do you dirty?
I think it starts with the financial transparency. If you do your will together, you see a financial advisor together, or if you're both aware of all your finances, then it's a bit easier to do a prenup. Where can someone get some more information? Where can you get started if you're looking at considering a prenup?
All the good family lawyers are members of Resolution. It's been a pretty prominent group that has existed. And in fact, Resolution were big players in ending no-fault divorce. They've had a great influence over trying to rectify the injustice of cohabitation without having any sensible legislation in place to really protect couples who don't choose to marry, who don't enter into a civil partnership. So, yeah, go to a resolution member.
So, yeah, you just check their member, or you can ask the person, are you a member of resolution?
You can Google resolution, and it'll actually have all of our details on it.
Amazing.
So there's a site that exists. It's really helpful.
Okay, amazing. And
it even tells you who offers free interviews.
Oh, nice. Nice.
Right, yeah, I'll be utilising that part. Thank you.
And just to be clear, this isn't something that people could just like draw up on a piece of paper and be like, you know, do it themselves.
No, I think it's extremely unlikely that the court are going to take any notice of the document. It's a bit like a will you knock up. It's so tragic when those documents end up being unenforceable. And, you know, do you really want to end up in a situation where, for the sake of a reasonable investment, you end up with something that's not worth the paper it's written on?
I'll finish on a story, true story. One of my cousins, they won't listen, so I can dig them out. he had a contract with his partner. So he's a male, she's a female. She wrote a contract to him saying, you don't have to work and you can stay at home. You just have to cook me a meal and you have to have sex with me. And she specified the position once a week. and that was the key to their relationship. I wonder if that would stand up in court.
No, I don't think so.
No.
Maybe in America.
Yeah. Always in America.
Always in America. What do you think about that, Damo?
I think I can't believe that you quoted Kanye West.
We want prenup. We want prenup.
Something that you need to have. That is a tune. We can't quote Kanye anymore, can we? Because
he's gone a bit loco.
Yeah.
Anyway,
R.I.P. But yeah, speak to your partner was what I took away from that, and also this idea that it's about protecting both parties and giving this reassurance, and it doesn't need to be seen as a thing of like, oh, I think you're going to leave me. It's just an adult conversation to have in the same way as if you're having children or you're putting a will together. Just have all them chats on one day, just box them off.
Knock them all out. Yeah, it's about transparency, and it's also about, like you said, looking after your kids, looking after your spouse. Like, so I think it saves you a lot of money in the long run if you do ever have a divorce.
I would love to see your transparency event where you've got to put out all your assets, all your random gold nuggets that you've got stored everywhere.
They're hidden under the floorboards, mate. Never find them.